Have you ever found yourself questioning the very foundation of the justice system? Imagine a world where one fateful decision in a crowded courtroom not only condemns an innocent man to decades behind bars but also conceals a scandal so explosive that it could shake the pillars of law and order. Picture the charged atmosphere of a trial where every eye in the room is fixed on a steely judge, a man whose reputation for being implacable and unyielding has long been the backbone of a system presumed to be infallible. Now, what if behind that veneer of authority lay a secret so deeply buried that its revelation might shatter the public's trust in everything they hold dear? Consider the young man standing in the defendant's seat, his eyes betraying a storm of emotions as he listens to the pronouncement of guilt, a verdict delivered with such finality that it seems to erase all traces of his existence. What if that young man had been set up, framed by forces operating in the shadows? What if the evidence that condemned him was not as clear-cut as it appeared, but was instead the product of manipulated records and coerced testimonies, meticulously designed to seal his fate? How many lives have been upended by decisions based on hidden truths and undisclosed evidence? Now, envision the judge, a seasoned jurist who has presided over countless cases and whose every ruling has been a testament to his unwavering belief in the system. Yet, beneath his composed exterior, a nagging doubt begins to surface. What if, in his pursuit of justice, he inadvertently became a pawn in a larger, more sinister game? A game where every piece of evidence was carefully orchestrated to hide a massive cover-up, and every testimony was tainted by coercion. Could it be that this respected judge, revered for his impartiality, might one day be forced to confront the possibility that he had condemned an innocent man? As the story unfolds, you will be taken on a journey into the labyrinth of corruption that festers within the corridors of power, a journey that will force you to ask yourself, how deep does this rot go? Is it possible that the very institutions we rely on for protection and justice are themselves steeped in deceit? With every new detail uncovered, the questions multiply. Who benefits from keeping the truth hidden? And how many more lives have been ruined by decisions that were anything but just? Imagine receiving a series of anonymous threats, a chilling reminder that the pursuit of truth is a dangerous path paved with peril. Picture the personal sacrifices made by those who dare to expose the underbelly of a corrupt system, risking not only their careers but their very lives to bring justice to light. What lengths would you go to if you knew that an innocent man's freedom and perhaps his very life depended on it? And when the evidence finally begins to mount, when the hidden documents and forgotten surveillance tapes start to reveal the real story, will you be ready to face the unsettling possibility that everything you believed about justice might be a lie? This is not just a tale of one wrongful conviction. It is a dramatic saga of betrayal, where trusted figures turn out to be orchestrators of a grand deception. As you delve deeper, you will encounter layers of manipulation, where every seemingly minor detail unravels a thread in the tapestry of corruption. Can you imagine the turmoil of a man who, after decades of unquestioning service, is forced to reckon with the fact that his own actions may have contributed to an injustice so profound that it reverberates through the very soul of society? With each twist and turn, this story challenges you to question the nature of truth and the price of silence. How long will the powerful continue to hide behind their badges and courtrooms, manipulating the system for their own gain? And when the truth finally emerges, will it be too late for those who have already suffered at the hands of a broken system? Before you embark on this eye-opening journey into the heart of corruption and redemption, ask yourself, how many more secrets lie hidden beneath the surface of our justice system? What price must be paid to unearth the truth? And ultimately, will the scales of justice ever be truly balanced again? Stay with us as we peel back the layers of deception and expose a scandal that could redefine everything you thought you knew about justice. In a bustling courtroom in Fresno, California, the atmosphere was heavy with both the oppressive summer heat and the gravity of a decision that would forever alter a young man's destiny. The day had begun like any other, yet no one could have predicted that the verdict delivered in that very room would not only condemn an innocent soul but also expose a labyrinth of corruption entrenched deep within the system. At the center of this unfolding drama stood Judge Gregory Barnes, a figure whose reputation for unwavering authority and a steely demeanor had long instilled fear and respect throughout the community. At 62 years old and boasting over 3 decades on the bench, Barnes had forged a legacy built on decisions that left no room for doubt. His face, lined with experience and hardened by the many cases he had presided over, reflected the resolute firmness of his rulings. That fateful day, his decision was meant to be final, and the courtroom fell silent as his booming voice filled the space. Across the room, Travis Monroe, a 24-year-old man with trembling hands yet a gaze that betrayed years of inner struggle, stood at the defense table. Travis had been thrust into the center of a case that would not only decide his future but would also alter the course of his life forever. Accused of an armed robbery at Anderson S. Jewelers, a high-profile heist that had left one man critically injured, Travis had maintained his innocence from the moment he was apprehended. Despite the overwhelming evidence presented against him, he never ceased to proclaim that he was not the man responsible for the violent crime. Judge Barnes began his address with a deep, resonant baritone that seemed to carry the weight of countless judgments. "You stand convicted by a jury of your peers for crimes that have caused irreparable harm to this community," he declared, his voice firm and unyielding. "Your actions were not only reckless but calculated, and you have shown no remorse." His words reverberated around the room, each syllable a final nail in the coffin of any hope for Travis's redemption. In the back row, Olivia Monroe, Travis's devoted mother, fought back tears as she clutched a faded photograph of the son she had raised with so much love and hope. She had once seen in him the promise of a future filled with possibility, dreaming that he might one day serve his community as a firefighter. Instead, that same promise was reduced to a single, crushing sentence: 60 years in state prison. The gavel's sharp strike echoed like the end of an era, and the courtroom erupted in gasps, murmurs, and the frantic scribbling of reporters desperate to capture every detail. As Travis was led away, his lips pressed tightly together as if to contain the torrent of emotions he could no longer express, the judge returned to his chambers. In the quiet solitude of his office, Barnes poured himself a cup of black coffee and stared into its swirling depths, almost searching for an answer in the dark liquid. He believed that justice had been served until a small, nagging detail began to disturb his certainty. The trial, which the local news had dubbed the Monroe heist case, had dominated headlines for weeks. The robbery at Anderson S. Jewelers was nothing short of a spectacle. A masked gunman had stormed into the store on a busy Thursday afternoon, brandishing a weapon and escaping with over $150,000 in stolen valuables. The chaos left the store clerk, Peter Arnold, fighting for his life amid the pandemonium. Travis, a part-time mechanic with no prior record of criminal behavior, had been arrested merely 2 weeks after the robbery when an anonymous caller had identified him as matching the description of the fleeing suspect. The prosecution's case against Travis was formidable. Eyewitness accounts, grainy surveillance footage, and an anonymous tip had all converged to paint a damning picture. According to the evidence, stolen goods had been recovered from a storage unit registered under Travis's name. Even his court-appointed defense attorney, Ethan Wallace, had struggled to dismantle the overwhelming mountain of evidence, despite Travis's desperate pleas of innocence. "I didn't do this," Travis had insisted in a trembling voice during his testimony. "I wasn't anywhere near that store. I've never even touched a gun." His alibi that he had been working a double shift at the auto repair shop crumbled when his employer admitted he could not account for his whereabouts during the crucial hours. As the prosecution's closing arguments rang out sharp, unyielding, and ruthless, Travis's defense grew increasingly feeble. "There are holes in this case," pleaded Wallace to the jury, his voice lacking the conviction needed to sway the minds before him. The jury's deliberation was swift, lasting less than 3 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. When the foreperson read the decision, Travis's face remained stoically blank, though the tightening of his jaw betrayed a storm of emotion held in check. Judge Barnes, ever impartial, prepared himself to deliver the sentence he deemed necessary based on his long years of experience. To him, Travis was not an innocent soul but rather another offender who had attempted to outwit a system he believed was unyielding. His eyes swept the courtroom, as if searching for any sign of contrition in Travis's demeanor. When the sentence was finally pronounced, 60 long years behind bars, the room collectively exhaled in relief for the victims and their families. For Travis and his grieving mother, however, it was a moment of crushing despair. With his mother's tearful gaze following him, Travis was led away, leaving behind an echo of what might have been. That evening, as Barnes signed the sentencing papers and retreated into the isolation of his private study, a subtle unease began to take hold. He dismissed it initially as the fatigue of a long day. Yet, as he stirred his coffee and gazed into its swirling depths, he could not shake the feeling that something critical had been overlooked, a piece of evidence, a detail that had been buried too easily. Little did he know that the truth he had unwittingly suppressed would soon claw its way back into the light, disrupting not only his carefully maintained record but also the very foundation of the justice system he had always upheld. In the days that followed, local media outlets continued to cover the case extensively. Headlines screamed about the notorious Monroe heist while public opinion was split between outrage and sympathy. Some viewed Judge Barnes as a hero who had delivered a stern verdict in the face of rampant crime. Others saw him as a cold, unyielding enforcer of a broken system that had failed a young, innocent man. The reverberations of that trial extended far beyond the courthouse walls, stirring debates about police procedures, the reliability of evidence, and the integrity of witness testimonies. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Barnes could not dismiss the feeling that his own judgment might have been clouded by an unspoken bias, a predisposition to condemn rather than to scrutinize the finer details of a case. It was on an otherwise unremarkable Wednesday evening that an unexpected development would force him to confront the possibility that he had sentenced an innocent man to a lifetime of despair. As Barnes sat alone in his study, the warm glow of his desk lamp illuminating stacks of legal briefs and case files, a new case landed on his desk, one involving police misconduct and questionable investigative practices. Intrigued and disturbed in equal measure, Barnes began to pore over the documents with the diligence of a man who had spent decades navigating the corridors of power and corruption. Among the paperwork, an evidence log from a previous investigation caught his eye. At first, it seemed like a trivial detail, a mere footnote amid the voluminous case files. But then, as he flipped through the pages, a name leapt out: Travis Monroe. Barnes frowned in disbelief. It was not uncommon for names to reappear in unrelated cases, but this instance felt profoundly different. His pulse quickened as he discovered that the evidence log detailed the contents of a police evidence locker from a robbery investigation that had occurred around the same time as the Anderson S. Jewelers case. The log described various items confiscated by the police, including a gun that matched the description of the weapon used in the robbery. The weapon, with its distinctive scratches on the barrel and unique make, was identical in every detail to the one presented as evidence during Travis's trial. Yet, this particular gun had never been mentioned during the trial, nor had it been submitted as evidence. Instead, it was recorded as having been seized during an entirely different arrest 2 days after the robbery. How can this be? Barnes muttered under his breath, his mind racing with the implications. If the gun had indeed been in police custody, it could not have been the instrument of the crime for which Travis had been convicted. And if it wasn't the weapon, then whose fingerprints were found on it? Haunted by the realization that something was deeply amiss, Barnes methodically cross-referenced the serial number of the weapon with the trial documents. The match was undeniable, same make, same markings. Yet the discrepancy in the evidence log could not be overlooked. As he stared at the pages before him, a sinking feeling took hold. This was no simple clerical error, it was an intentional omission, a deliberate manipulation of evidence designed to ensure that Travis would be found guilty. The thought that an innocent man might have been set up sent a surge of anger and regret coursing through Barnes's veins. Determined to uncover the full extent of the deception, Barnes immediately requested access to the complete case file of the separate robbery investigation. The folder that arrived the next morning was thick with police reports, photographs, and witness statements. As Barnes painstakingly reviewed each document, the threads of a far more sinister tapestry began to emerge. The detective who had testified during Travis's trial turned out to be the very same officer in the unrelated case, a man whose record, on the surface, appeared impeccable but was now marred by a history of questionable tactics. This detective, whose name would soon become synonymous with corruption, was Detective Marcus Reed. Barnes recalled that during the trial, an anonymous tip had sealed Travis's fate. At the time, the tip was dismissed as one more piece of circumstantial evidence among many. However, upon closer inspection, Barnes discovered that the call had not come from an ordinary citizen, but from a burner phone registered under Detective Reed's name. The revelation was staggering. The very person entrusted with upholding the law had instead manipulated evidence, coerced witnesses, and orchestrated a scenario designed to convict an innocent man. The weight of the discovery was almost too much to bear. In a state of disbelief and mounting anger, Barnes knew that he could no longer ignore the truth. He contacted Daniel Carter, a retired investigator known for his no-nonsense approach and unyielding commitment to exposing corruption. Over coffee in a dimly lit diner off Highway 99, Barnes laid out the evidence he had uncovered. Daniel listened intently, his expression growing graver with each detail. "This isn't just negligence, Gregory," Daniel said softly, setting his coffee mug down with deliberate force. "If what you're saying is true, someone went to extraordinary lengths to ensure that this young man took the fall." Barnes nodded, his determination stealing with every word. The two men plunged into a rigorous investigation, combing through police records, re-interviewing witnesses, and uncovering internal memos that had long been hidden from public view. What they found was staggering: falsified reports, missing evidence logs, and witness statements that had been doctored to fit a narrative fabricated by those in power. One witness, a store clerk who had initially identified a different suspect, eventually admitted that he had been pressured into changing his statement to implicate Travis. When Barnes and Daniel tracked this witness down to a modest apartment on the outskirts of town, his confession tumbled out in a trembling rush. "I didn't want to do it," he stammered. "Detective Reed told me if I didn't I'd be arrested for obstruction. I had no choice." The name Detective Reed sent shockwaves through Barnes's already troubled conscience. Here was a man with a spotless official record, protected by layers of bureaucratic red tape, yet his past was riddled with intimidation, coercion, and the deliberate suppression of the truth. As Daniel and Barnes delved deeper, they recovered deleted emails from Reed's police account. One email, in particular, was addressed to the district attorney and detailed a plan to fabricate evidence in the Anderson S. Jewelers case. Attached to the email was a list of doctored witness statements and a series of falsified reports. Reading the email, Barnes felt an overwhelming surge of rage not just at the injustice inflicted upon Travis, but at the very system he had once trusted implicitly. With damning evidence in hand, Barnes realized that he was at a crossroads. To expose the corruption and to atone for the possibility that he had unjustly condemned an innocent man, he knew he had to act swiftly and decisively. Ignoring the anonymous threats that began pouring in almost immediately, threats that warned him to drop the investigation, Barnes prepared a formal motion to reopen Travis Monroe's case. He attached every shred of evidence he had gathered, the omitted weapon log, the retracted witness statements, and the incriminating emails implicating Detective Reed. The motion sent shock waves through the courthouse, shaking the foundations of a system that had long been taken for granted as infallible. As Barnes filed the motion, local headlines exploded with accusations of corruption within the Fresno Police Department. The public, already divided on the case, now found themselves at the center of a storm that questioned the very integrity of their law enforcement institutions. Some hailed Barnes as a courageous whistleblower, a man who dared to confront an entrenched system of deceit. Others branded him a traitor to the order he had helped maintain, accusing him of jeopardizing public safety for the sake of personal redemption. The fallout was swift and brutal. Colleagues who once respected him began to distance themselves, and Barnes found himself the target of anonymous phone calls, his car defaced with slashed tires, and a series of cryptic notes left on his doorstep demanding that he drop it or else. Despite the overwhelming pressure, Barnes remained resolute. He knew that the fight for justice was far from over and that every piece of evidence he unearthed was a step toward righting a grievous wrong. With Daniel Carter by his side, Barnes continued his relentless pursuit of the truth. They combed through more records, revisited old witness testimonies, and scrutinized every detail of the investigation. The deeper they dug, the darker the revelations became. It was no longer just about Travis Monroe's wrongful conviction, it was about exposing a systemic rot that had allowed corruption to flourish unchecked within the ranks of those sworn to protect and serve. The breakthrough came when Daniel managed to recover additional security camera footage from a parking lot near Anderson S. Jewelers, recorded on the day of the robbery. The footage, inexplicably never submitted during the original trial, showed a man matching Detective Reed's physical description leaving the scene with a duffel bag. Barnes' heart pounded as he reviewed the grainy video, which provided not only exculpatory evidence for Travis but also a direct link to the corrupt detective's actions. The realization was damning: the robbery had been orchestrated by Detective Reed himself. With this new footage, every piece of the puzzle finally fell into place. Determined to ensure that the truth could no longer be buried, Barnes called for an emergency hearing. In a packed courtroom, with reporters and activists alike on the edge of their seats, the damning video footage was presented on a large screen. The gallery erupted in shocked gasps as the reality of the situation sank in. Barnes, with a voice that trembled between indignation and determination, pointed directly at the screen and declared, "This man standing here is the same detective who led the investigation that put Travis Monroe behind bars. He manipulated evidence, coerced witnesses, and framed an innocent man to protect his own tracks." The confrontation that followed was fierce. Detective Reed, his face pale yet defiant, was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs. His lawyer shouted that the entire motion was nothing more than a personal vendetta, a claim that fell on deaf ears in a courtroom already buzzing with the realization of deep-seated corruption. The case quickly escalated to a higher court where Travis Monroe's conviction was set to be re-examined. In the days that followed, the atmosphere around the courthouse grew charged with anticipation and controversy. Barnes' role in reopening the case turned him into both a hero for those seeking accountability and a pariah for those determined to maintain the status quo. Yet, through it all, he remained focused on one goal: to free a man who had been wronged by a flawed system. Weeks later, the courtroom was filled once again, but this time with a palpable sense of hope and tension. Travis, now visibly worn and aged by the harsh reality of prison life, sat quietly at the defense table. His demeanor, though subdued, carried a quiet strength that spoke of the resilience of the human spirit. Olivia Monroe, his mother, watched with a mixture of hope and heartbreak as the presiding judge prepared to announce the decision of the retrial. In that solemn moment, Judge Barnes, who had become a reluctant champion of justice, felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at the man whose fate had been intertwined with his own journey of redemption. The new evidence, the surveillance footage, the falsified reports, the recovered emails, was irrefutable. Every shred of manipulated evidence pointed to the same inescapable truth: Travis Monroe had been framed, and Detective Marcus Reed had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to ensure his conviction. When the presiding judge finally declared the decision to overturn Travis's conviction, the courtroom erupted in a mixture of applause and tears. For a brief moment, it seemed as if justice had finally been restored. Yet, the repercussions of the case extended far beyond the immediate victory. In the aftermath, Detective Reed faced criminal charges for his actions, and an independent investigation into the Fresno Police Department exposed a culture of corruption that had festered for years. The revelations sparked a nationwide debate on police accountability and the need for systemic reform. Meanwhile, Judge Barnes, who had risked everything to pursue the truth, found himself at a crossroads, haunted by the knowledge that his own decisions had once contributed to a grave injustice, yet determined to fight for a future where justice could prevail. As for Travis Monroe, his journey was only just beginning. Freed from the burden of a wrongful conviction, he vowed to dedicate his life to helping others who had been unjustly imprisoned, turning his own harrowing experience into a beacon of hope and resilience. His story would serve as a rallying cry for those who believed that the pursuit of truth could overcome even the most entrenched corruption. In the weeks and months that followed, the fallout from the case continued to ripple through the community. Activists organized rallies calling for sweeping reforms in law enforcement, while local news outlets and national media alike delved into the intricacies of the scandal. Judge Barnes, though lauded by many for his unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth, remained introspective. He knew that the victory was only one piece of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle that demanded constant vigilance and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths about the system. Every step of the investigation had reinforced a single, undeniable reality: justice is not infallible. It requires constant scrutiny, unwavering courage, and a willingness to expose the flaws that allow corruption to persist. The story of Travis Monroe and Judge Gregory Barnes was a powerful reminder that the fight for justice does not end in a courtroom. It begins with the relentless pursuit of truth and a commitment to holding those in power accountable for their actions. As you watch this video, consider the implications of what you've seen today. How many more stories lie hidden beneath the surface, waiting for someone to uncover the truth? What will it take for the system to finally recognize its own failings and strive for genuine reform? Now that you've heard the entire story of Travis Monroe's wrongful conviction and Judge Barnes' courageous stand against corruption, ask yourself, can our justice system truly be trusted when the very people sworn to protect it might be the ones orchestrating its downfall? What changes would you demand if you were in their shoes? Stay curious and keep questioning, because sometimes the fight for justice isn't over in the courtroom, it begins with you.